Welcome back. The last sense that we're going to talk about is hearing or sound detection. Sound detection is still a form of mechanoreception, similar to when we discussed touch. Remember when we talked about touch and we talked about the mechanoreceptors, we were saying how it responds to the force applied to it, and hearing is going to be similar to that. Hearing organs in invertebrates and vertebrates are similar to the bristle or the hair sensory neurons on the exoskeleton or skin, but with a bit more complexity. Insects have auditory mechanoreceptors called scolopedia. These are highly specialized structures made of bipolar sensory neurons and surrounded by many accessory cells. The axon and the soma, or the cell body, are surrounded by Schwann cells that we talked about when we talked about the nervous system. And an extending dendrite is surrounded by scholopate cells. And these scholopate cells are going to protect it. Here you can see the bristle that we talked about when we talked about mechanoreception. And remember, it's a stretch receptor, so however much this bristle is displaced is the type of response that you would get. It's a graded response based on how much stretch there is to the bristle shaft. Hearing in the scolopedia is going to be similar to that. So you have the dendrite coming up here, and the sensory body down here, the soma down here, and then the axon going away from that. Cilia extend from the dendrites and are connected to a tympanum, like an eardrum, and detect movement in the tympanum. These tympanic membranes can be located in different areas, and you can see here a mosquito and a cicada is going to be located down here, and then the grasshopper, it's going to be located over here. And these tympanic membranes can have anywhere from 1 to 1,000 scolopedia associated with it. So the more sensitive they can hear, the more scolopedia they're going to have attached to that tympanic membrane. The ears of vertebrates also contain specialized sensory hairs, and these cells are going to transmit sensory information to the adjacent neurons through a chemical synapse. These hairs are called stereocilia, and they function like the bristles do on the insect touch sensory system. These stereocilia that you can see down here are going to bend in response to sound waves, and the bending changes the membrane potential, releasing neurotransmitters. The stereocilia are arranged from shortest, like over here, up to the tallest. And when the stereocilia are displaced from shortest to tallest, in this direction here, the neurotransmitters are released, creating an action potential in the sensory neurons. When the stereocilia are replaced in the opposite way, from the tallest to the shortest, they are going to reduce the neurotransmission and decrease the sensory neuron response. And again, the neurotransmitter release is going to be scaled based on the amount of displacement in these stereocilias. Again, this is a graded response that's going to affect the neuronal response. Additionally, these hair cells are joined to increase the sensitivity of their response. You can see here, this is a bullfrog, the saccular hair cells, and you can see they have these little links to them that are going to increase the response. Hearing in mammals occurs when hair cells in the inner ear are affected by sound waves, as we just talked about. The ear of mammals is highly specialized with different regions to also help in vestibular functions, which we'll talk about in a second, which help with balance and orientation. Let's go through the mammalian ear. You can see here the outermost structure of the mammalian ear is the pinna. That's your ear, the part you pierce or you clean with Q-tips. That's going to be the outer ear. The purpose of the pinna is to funnel the sound waves from here all the way down into your auditory canal, where the waves vibrate the tympanic membrane. And you can see here as we blow up this area here, here's your pinna, your external ear, your auditory canal here, and then the first structure you reach is your tympanic membrane, your eardrum. Inside the tympanic membrane, there is an air-filled sac in the middle ear, and that's right here. This area contains specialized bones called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. The malleus is here, the incus is here, and the stapes is down here. Kind of looks like a little wishbone. These bones are going to vibrate from the incoming sound waves and transmit this vibration into the inner ear. So it's going to be dampened by this tympanic membrane. You get vibrations into this airspace here, and then these little bones here are going to transmit those vibrations to the inner ear. The middle ear also contains this structure called the eustachian tube. And the eustachian tube is going to connect the middle ear to the throat to help equalize pressure and drain any fluids. The inner ear is fluid filled, and this can complicate the transmission of sound waves. Because the fluid does not compress like air does, the malleus, incus, and stapes amplify the pressure from the air to the fluid-filled inner ear by compressing the waves from a larger area like the tympanic membrane to a smaller area like the oval window, which is just under the stapes. The cochlea in the inner ear is a fluid-filled coiled chamber, and you can see that here. And we're going to blow that up. So you have the oval window right here under the stapes, and then this cochlea coiled right here. And this is this area blown up. Here's a cross section through that cochlea that is coiled right here. As the stapes presses on that oval window, the fluid in the cochlea is going to move. This movement forces the fluid over the hair cells, stimulating them into releasing neurotransmitters to create an action potential. The lining of the cochlea is covered in basilar membrane, and the hair cells sit on top of that. The basilar membrane is thicker and stiffer near the oval window where the fluid movement is initiated, and thinner and more fluid at the farthest point. You can see how that basilar membrane, which is down here, these cells here, is thicker over here, and it gets thinner as you go more inward. The thicker basilar membrane closer to the oval window moves more from low frequency waves, and the thinner basilar membrane farthest from the oval window is going to move more from high frequency waves. And this is important because the movement of the basilar membrane moves the hair cells in a region called the organ of Corti. This region of the cochlea, the organ of Corti, has 4 rows of hair cells, and you can see these 3 here, the purple cells, and then this inner one over here. So these 3 rows are considered the outer hair cells, and then this 1 row is considered the inner hair cells. These hair cells are covered by a membrane. You can see that up here, that tectorial membrane. And when the basilar membrane vibrates, it pushes these hair cells up into that tectorial membrane, and thus moving the hair cells. We know the response when hair cells move, right? Then you get that action potential ensuing. The inner hair cells provide most of the sensory input to the central nervous system. The outer hair cells can amplify the movement and in turn amplify the sound. There are hair cells along the whole basilar membrane which help determine sound frequency. And again, hair cell movement is graded by how much they are displaced and how much neurotransmitters they release. So again, as this basilar membrane is vibrated, it will push these hair cells up to this tectorial membrane. These are the different little stereocilia, and how much they push up will help move those stereocilia where you get release of neurotransmitters and an action potential. The role of these outer hair cells is to amplify that movement, and then that inner hair cell is the one that's going to provide most of that sensory input to the central nervous system. And you can see here these afferent and efferent axons coming to and going from the central nervous system. Fish, on the other hand, have some unique structures for hearing. Remember that they are hearing sound waves underwater. Some fish have something called a lateral line along the sides of their body, which responds to water flow over the surface. They have cilia in specialized structures in the lateral line that work somewhat like the stereocilia of hair cells. This is going to provide directional information to the fish. Some fish can also hear using their swim bladder to convert pressure gradients into vibrations. And you can see that down here in this fish. Here is the swim bladder here. And these fish have specialized bones similar to our Malleus, Incus, and Stapes in this area. They're called Weberian ossicles. And those Weberian ossicles are 4 bones that are going to transmit the vibrations from the swim bladder down here to the inner ear of the fish. Teleost fish also have this structure called an otolith, or an ear stone. And this is a dense bone that's going to move in response to direction and force. Those otoliths are going to rub up against a sensory membrane, which will provide information of speed and direction to the fish's brain. Vertebrates also have vestibular organs, which help detect acceleration and balance. The otolith is part of that in fish, and you can see these coiled bones here. That is also part of that. And mammals also have the semicircular canal of the vestibular system, which again are going to help with orientation and balance and acceleration, so you know how fast you're moving and feelings like that. It's generally this vestibular system that goes awry when you're feeling seasick or motion sick. Bats and marine mammals here using echolocation. Echolocation is a series of high-frequency pulses that some animals use to detect objects, usually food. It's kind of like a biosonar, where some vertebrates emit a sound that bounces off an object and is reflected back to the animal. The returning sound waves provide information about the reflecting object. This system is used in nocturnal animals or animals that forage over a wide range. The high-frequency sound can be emitted from the larynx or the nose and pulsed in rapid succession. The animal can hear the high-frequency sound in their ears and actually process an image in the central nervous system. Sound waves attenuate in the air, therefore, the returning sound waves are very low energy, and the ears must be adapted for hearing the returning pulses. There is less sound attenuation in water, but cetaceans that echolocate, cetaceans are whales and dolphins, still have uniquely adapted ears because there's no external pinna, and we'll talk about that in a second. Sound detection in cetaceans occurs from sound waves vibrating the lower jawbone, down here the mandible, which transmits vibrations to the ear. This lower jawbone, the mandible, near the ear is very thin and hollow and is filled with a special fat called acoustic fat. The acoustic fat and the shape of the bone help funnel sound waves to the tissues surrounding the ear. The ear bone of most cetaceans is not attached to the skull, but surrounded by cartilaginous tissue. All of these tissues are adapted to focusing sound to the inner ear for precise hearing. As we talked about with bats, they are also highly adapted for this type of hearing, and they have specialized muscles in the middle ear that contract to dampen the sound of the emitting pulse. When these muscles relax, the ear membrane becomes more sensitive to the lower energy returning sound. Echolocation is really a unique way to hear, and even some people that are sight impaired have also been able to use echolocation with their sticks, and they can tap and they can actually tell the difference of what they're tapping on and what's in front of them based on hearing the returning sound. And we'll talk about sound production in just a minute, or in the next lecture, but for dolphins, what happens is they have this specialized acoustic fat in the melon in their forehead, and that is going to produce the sound or emit the sound. The sound will bounce off the object, a fish or whatever, and the sound will travel back again to that lower jawbone, the mandible, where there's some acoustic fat there, and then the ear is right on the other side of this little acoustic window. Any communication must travel through the environment. And animals live in a wide variety of environments, ranging from small microhabits all the way up to acres and acres of land. And communication will also differ in aquatic habitats compared to terrestrial habitats. Sound is the propagation of waves of compressed air or water emanating from a source. And these waves can be produced in many different ways, including vibrating an animal's wings, fish snapping their swim bladder, crickets rubbing their legs, or vocal cords in mammals. In general, sound production is incredibly complex, and not all animals are actually capable of producing sound. Our next lecture will talk about how different animals produce sound.